be put in here in a small container, which is missing right now. Then it would be closed and it would be put in the base of a wagon and taken along to church to keep the feet warm, both in the wagon and at church. Next to that, we have a bellows, and when this was pumped, the air helped to keep the fire burning. Here we have an old bucket made of leather, and it is dried through the years with the handle broken, but it's still a fine example of an early bucket. This is a piece that played a very important part in the lives of people back in the 1700s. It is a bed warmer. The coals from the fireplace would be put in here, and then it would be taken upstairs and used between the sheets so that the bed would be warm when the person got into the bed. Here we have a wrought iron piece that is used for holding implements, can be used for holding fireplace equipment, and is typical of things that were made in a local blacksmith shop. Moving on, we have the innkeeper's desk with the storage compartment and a small drawer for records. We have a fine old pewter inkwell that has a place to rest the pens, the quill pens that were used in the early days. Up here we have a poster, which is now framed, telling about the arrangements to get to the early train from this location. Hiram Finch lived a short distance up the road to where the entrance to Windmill Farms is located today. And Hiram Finch was a collateral ancestor of mine, and he was the stagecoach driver, and he collected 37.5 cents to take passengers down to meet the train. Going over here, I would like to show you this plaque. In 1986, Mr. James Robeson helped us to refurbish this room in memory of his wife, Jan, who was a lifelong member of this society. Here we are in the early meeting room. This is used for rotating exhibits, and right now we're thinking ahead to Christmas, so we're setting up our Christmas exhibit. This room has a rich history, and I'd like to share a little bit of it with you. Captain John Smith bought his tavern in 1797, and the following year he added this room to the building. So this became the meeting room for the town of North Castle, as Captain John Smith was the town clerk. So the town board met here, the elections were held here, the general town meetings were held here, and of course, because the building itself was a tavern, much tavern activity took place here. So that for many years, this was indeed the center of town activity. Captain John Smith died in 1841, and following his death, his son Samuel became the town clerk. So the meetings continued here, and all of the town clerk's duties, like issuing licenses, etc., took place here. Captain John Smith's son Samuel died in 1884. And following that period, there was a farm here, a very active farm. Then various people purchased the building as a private residence, and it had a long history until the North Castle Historical Society bought it in 1977 And once again, it became a meeting room for use by the public. Some of our meetings are held in here, and we especially like to have rotating exhibits where various people in the community lend some of their collections to be shown for the public to enjoy. This building has wonderful old wood paneling, as you can see here, and of course a typical fireplace. These are wall sconces because candles, of course, were used in the early days. This is a piece called North Castle, New York in Revolutionary Times. Lucille Bruno did the artwork and I did the research, and we laid it out showing the entire town of North Castle as it was just after the Revolutionary War. Because of course until 1791 North Castle was twice this size, but in 1791 it broke apart and Newcastle was formed. So we're very pleased about this, and copies of this are still available here at the Society. We have wonderful old floorboards here, some of them measuring 20 inches in width. As I said, we are presently working on our Christmas exhibit, and as an example of some of the things that are shown, these are wonderful old early Christmas cards from the Victorian era, because this is set up as a Victorian Christmas. And now I'd like to invite you to come and see the rest of our complex. Here we are at an old mileage marker. These were put along the New York to Danbury Post Road around the 1770s. They were important to the driver of the stagecoach for two reasons. One, he was able to know where the mail was to be delivered because they were marked as how far they were from New York City. And two, he was able to know where he would be able to stop for overnight visits when it grew dark. Moving over here by the tree, we have a lovely old millstone. This is one of a pair that were used where the stream flowed along where Kensico Reservoir is today. And right beside it, we have a stepping stone. That's a stone that was used for people to get out of their carriages or off their horses. This one stood at the store of a man named John Griffin, and you can see that it's marked 1790. His store was over on the King Street intersection with what we call Old Route 22. This is the ox cramp shed. It was part of the Brundage blacksmith shop for many years. The oxen would be brought in here, and this sling was used to raise the oxen off the ground because the oxen could not stand on 3 feet the way that the horses were able to do. Up here on the wall, it shows you what the shoes look like. Up in the front, we have a place where the oxen had their head put through, and the 2 sticks would keep them from backing out because their horns would be caught. And always the ox cramp shed faced the south because there was no way of putting heat in it, and they wanted as much sun as they could get. Here we are at the old Brundage blacksmith shop. This blacksmith shop stood diagonally across the street back in the 1820s, and the New York to Danbury Post Road went right past the shop. The stagecoach driver would sometimes stop the stage to water the horses or perhaps to have a small repair made. 3 generations of the Brundages worked in this shop, and it was much more than just a shop where the horses were shod. There were farm implements made here, household utensils, and it was a gathering place for farmers in the area to come and learn the news of the community. In the early days, they used what they had. You can notice this window and the one behind me do not match. They made do with what they had and used what they could. This shop was used as a blacksmith shop until about 1962 when Mr. Brundage died. And now let's take a look inside the shop. As we enter this old blacksmith shop, thoughts turn to cobwebs and memories, and this place abounds in both. Of course, the heart of the place is the forge, and standing at the forge is our blacksmith, Ernie. Hello, Ernie. This we're very fortunate to have. It is the original forge that was used by Mr. Brundage, Harry Brundage, here in the blacksmith shop. And thanks to good people like John Schnorr and Jean Curry, we were able to have many of the original pieces that were used here. Ernie, how about demonstrating how a blacksmith made a horseshoe? Could you do that for us? Excellent. He's now putting it onto this fine old anvil. I think that this anvil was probably saved for us by John Schnorr. Also, there are straight pieces of metal, and as Ernie is starting to work on that, let me show you a hook that was made here in the shop, a lovely S-turn for hanging. And then down here, this fork has a lovely twist in it. And these were the kinds of things that the blacksmith could do, get fancy or have plain things. There were many, many different sorts of things made in a blacksmith shop. In addition to shoeing horses and shoeing the oxen, he also did all sorts of farm implements and utility items. One of the things that was very popular was a set of andirons. Many homes in the area had andirons made right here in this shop. So thank you, Ernie, for the demonstration. Over here we have a portable forge and another anvil. These would have been used in a wagon and taken off to perhaps a farm where there were a number of horses, so that the horses could be shod without being brought in to the blacksmith shop. Here we have a seeder. The corn would have been put in here, and the farmer would have gone along with it. And of course, any metal part could have been repaired here in the shop. In the back here, we have a bone crusher. This is an instrument that was used to make bone meal, which was used as fertilizers in the early days. The next interesting piece is this old wagon wheel. Now, just north of the shop, there was a wheelwright shop, and the wheelwright shop certainly did all the work on the wagons, but the metal rim, which is around the outside, would have been applied here in the blacksmith shop. Here we have a Champion root cutter, used many years ago. Here is a plow, a hand plow. Now the plow that we see over against the wall here is one that would have been used behind the oxen with the man guiding the handles. But this is just a single man's plow. Over in this far corner, we have a fine old large barrel. Barrels were used for many things in the early days. And leaning against the barrel, we have two early sleds. These are nice old wooden ones, and they're the forerunner of the flexible flyer, if you will. Here we have an excellent one-horse open sleigh. Now you all remember the song Jingle Bells. This would have been the type of sleigh that they would have driven home to grandmother's house for Thanksgiving. One adult and two children would fit in here nicely, or two adults, and they might have even had a little heater down in the foot, one of the little old foot warmers. Now, the front of this sleigh would have been hitched to the horses by this that's overhead. And I want to see if I can, yes, the bells did ring. Those were the sleigh bells. So now you can remember when you hear jingle bells, you can remember where the bells would be. Coming over here, we have some very interesting implements. This is a grinding machine, a very small one with the wheel up here. If you look here, you will see that this strap is broken, but there would be an identical strap over here, which obviously is missing now. And the person who was traveling from house to house would put his arms through this, and this instrument would be on his back so that he could visit houses and barns and sharpen items like knives or scissors or files, any smaller item that needed sharpening. Down here in back, you will see a large cauldron. Now, this is an enormous size that would have been used perhaps for scalding pigs after they were butchered. The water would have been boiling and the pigs would have been immersed in that. Here we have a grindstone. And of course, many instruments needed to be sharpened. For instance, the scythes, like the one hanging here in front. All kinds of tools, all kinds of instruments in the barn would have been sharpened on such a grindstone. Then turning here, we have an interesting piece that probably would have been in a wheelwright shop next door to a blacksmith shop. It's actually used for leather. The person doing the work would sit here on the bench, and there is a foot control which tightens this, and pieces of leather could have been put in here and cut for reins. Areas could be mended on here, pieces of seats of wagons. Shoes could have been put in here. Even the stirrups on the saddles needed to have strips of leather. So this instrument could have been used for many, many different things. Up here over my head, we have the saws that were used for cutting large blocks of ice. Now remember, there were no refrigerators, so ice was very important. And large squares of ice would be cut out of the local ponds and put onto a sleigh and then brought in to be used for the whole winter and right into the spring. It would have been packed in probably hay or straw to keep it in the best condition possible. Here are some ice tongs, which the farmer or the lady of the house could use for moving a block of ice to keep the food cool. We have, of course, rakes. We have an early scale up here and even a pitchfork, and of course an old lantern hanging there. Over here is a fine example of a large-sized pot-bellied stove. Now, many of the local people would come into this blacksmith shop, gather around the stove in the fall, the winter, the spring, not just to enjoy its warmth, but also to hear the local news, the local gossip, if you will. So this really was a centerpiece. Next to the stove is a large wooden bucket filled with water. Now this was important for the blacksmith. He used this once he had shaped his particular piece of work, and it was red hot, and he had it the way that he wanted it. He would take it over with his forceps, dip it into the water to cool it. I can almost hear the hiss that it would make. So as we go, I want to say goodbye to you, Ernie, and I will see you soon again. Thank you. This is the East Middle Patton School, and I hear Virginia ringing the school bell. She is our school marm. This building stood over 100 years ago at the corner of East Middle Patton Road and Mianus River Road. It was a school that served from grades 1 through 8. There was a lovely lady named Mrs. Landfair who was the teacher there for nearly a half a century. It has been a wonderful school. We moved it here in 1986. It was cut in half and moved in 2 sections, trucked along the road, and then joined together here to look exactly as it did back in the 1880s. Good morning, Virginia.
Good morning.
Nice to see you.
And it's nice to have you here. Would you please go into
Here we are in the historic East Middle Patton School. This room holds a lot of memories for a number of people. It served as the school from the 1880s right through to the early part of the 1960s. One lady is associated primarily with this school. Her name was Geraldine Landfair. She came in 1915 as a young maiden lady, became acquainted with the postman who served that area, and they were married and spent their lives in the helping in the East Middle Patton School. She was a most devoted teacher. She served for 46 years in this school. She sat on a seat above a platform. This was the type of desk that would be used high in the room so that the teacher could overlook all of the smaller desks. Now, the desks reflect different periods in the history of the school. This is a very early double desk. Again, an early desk. Then later they became one unit desks, so that we tried to show all the progression as the school went through the years. Over here, we have something that was called a dunce cap. Now, when the children were in school and one child misbehaved, the teacher could call the naughty student up, put the student on this stool facing the wall and wearing the dunce cap. And the student would have to sit there until the teacher permitted the person to go back to the seat. Geography was a very important subject in the 8th grades that were here in this school. This is an elementary geography by the American Book Company and dates to about 1896. Going along with geography, we have this wonderful old globe. This globe has an edge around it that tells the months of the year, the various signs of the zodiac, and was used by the teacher in all sorts of geography classes from 1 through 8. Here we have an interesting teaching tool. This is called a silent instructor. These knobs on the right-hand side can be moved to slide the numbers into various positions. These little slides on the top are like shades, and they come down to cover numbers that do not need to be used. The teacher could have children work on multiplication, addition, subtraction. Any sort of arithmetic problem could be solved on this board. Here we have the ever-present dictionary. If children in the room found words that they did not know the meaning of, they would be sent to the dictionary to look up the meaning and to understand how to use the word. Here on the teacher's desk, we have a couple of interesting pencil boxes. This one is of the Victorian era, and it has some very fancy designs on the top. This one has a sliding top, and if you turn the top, it has a second compartment underneath for storing pens and pencils. And of course, the pens were the type that you had to put into the inkwell to use. In the earlier days, it would have been these small slates that would have been used at each desk. One of the things that is absolutely unheard of now is to switch a child. But in the early schools, back certainly in the 1880s up until the 1940s, it was not unusual for a teacher to send a child out in the woods after misbehaving and request that a switch be cut. And the child was actually switched in front of the other children in the schoolroom. Over here, of course, is the blackboard for doing homework, as well as the blackboard behind the teacher. When a child wanted a drink of water, there was always the water pail in the early days, And although it would be unheard of now, all the children took a sip of water out of the same dipper. And the older boys in the classroom, those that sat in the back, would be asked to go out to the pump